Hello guys, it's me, Stark, and I'm here today to talk about the Franks, one of the most popular civilizations from Age of Empires, but honestly, Franks have been not seen lately on the pro scene, and I think that there are many reasons behind that. Let's first talk about the civilization, and later we try to discuss a bit this issue. So the Franks are a cavalry civilization, and honestly, they do live what they are telling here. Their foragers basically do work 15% faster, so they already have a Dark Age food bonus that will benefit them during Dark Age and early Feudal Age, which can be pretty good. Where are the forage from the Frank? There it is. So by right now, around 4 minutes, the Frank will already start benefiting from these forage bushes. The other bonus that are also pretty good towards the scout gameplay is that they do have their mule technologies upgraded for free. So when you go towards the mule, you also have access to horse collar, rapid blow, and crop rotation, all for free as the Frank. For this reason, the civilization is pretty good and can actually play quite well, setting up their economy once in Feudal Age. So the regular gameplay for the Frank is actually going for fast population up, something between 18 and 19 views, mass as much food as possible in order to be able to produce extra scouts. That can be achieved by luring, what Jordan's doing here on this game, and of course, since Franks are a civilization specialized in cavalry, what you expect from the Frank is to drop a stable, start making scouts, and then just keep its initial 8 to 10 villagers on the wood while making farms around its TC. That's the way that this civilization should develop and should play. Right here, as you can see, Jordan's about to finish making his stable, he's making the double beat X, and he already has food to make several scouts, or to quill up several scouts. The early feudal age is the best stage of the game here for the Frank civilization to actually deliver some damage with their scouts. The reason is the Frank scout will actually have access to extra HP. All the cavalry units from the Franks do have plus 20% HP. This is a huge bust during the feudal age. It means that you actually have extra HP, and in the 1v1 trade your scout should always best the enemy scouts, until of course we came into the point of the castle age, until late stages of feudal age, because then the Franks, since they do have this bonus not to give their cavalry way too much HP, they do not have access to the bloodlines. Having no access to the bloodlines means that in some stage of the game, the enemy scouts can actually be better than the Frank ones. For example, right there you can see a Major Scout trying to deliver some damage and finding some kills. The Frank scouts are going after it, so it's very unlikely that these scouts are actually gonna find some kills there. Oh, they actually did found, but there are the scouts stopping them from delivering the damage. The problem is the enemy scouts can scale up to 65 HP, while the Frank scouts will be at maximum 54 HP during feudal age. So in a scenario where the game goes like very long, the Franks are not the best ones to play in the full scout war. They are actually gonna be without this extra HP. With that said, until the early stages of feudal age, or until you have something around 10 to 12 scouts, you can still be playing as the Frank. But you should also take that into consideration, because also your light cavalry will receive this 20% extra, but are still not going to be as strong as an enemy light cavalry. So use this early bonus if you want to play as the Franks, and abuse from this timing, because this is where your civilization actually shine. Let's already discuss some of the issues of the Frank civilization and why the civilization is not so popular on the ranked ladder these days. First off, their best opening is obviously the scout, but that also creates a small problem for the Frank. Your opponents already expect you, and they already know where is your strength. So on lower elos, or until like 16 or 17 plus, I think that the Franks can be a pretty decent choice and a pretty decent civilization. But starting to go behind the elo, players are starting to wall, players are going for faster openings like infantry ones with the early drushes, 2+2 drushes, French drush, men at arms, and all of these openings are actually actually faster than the scouts from the Franks. So they actually lose part of their early feudal age pressure in order to have to counter these openings or trying to counterattack. If they actually play against a strong archer civilization, it will also scale better, often going faster to the castle age and outmassing the Frank. The biggest issue for the Franks is also, but the biggest issue for the Franks, guys, actually relies on the later stages of the game. I think that the Franks have one of the weaker technology trees of all the Age of Empires for the Imperial Age after the gold is gone. It's worth mentioning. First off, let's talk about their weakness. They do have no access to either ring archer armor and bracer. This makes their skirmisher not scale so well. The only upgrade that affects skirmishers on Imperial Age is actually the chemistry. So this means that if you have to play against a strong Cav archer civilization, for example, a Turk, a Wei, a Han, anything, a Mongol, you are actually going to suffer a lot, and many civilizations do have extra bonus for their Cav archers that they didn't used to have in the past, and for that reason Franks are even weaker now because of they do lack this. The other issue here is that if you have to play, the only unit that you can fully upgrade it from your trash units is the Halberdier, and of course your champion that has nothing special and also costs gold, your lead skirmisher is trash, and you only have up to light cavalry. But remember, the maximum amount of that you are getting here is actually 62. Oh my goodness, 62 HP. So basically you have a weaker version of the light cavalry than a regular civilization. For example, let's say that the Armenian light cavalry can actually be better than the Frank in many situations of the Imperial Age. So it's barely a support unit, and your other trash units are not so great. This actually forces the Frank into a very inconvenient way of playing. They kind of have to finish off the game while still in possession of gold. For this reason, on team games they can just trade off with their allies and keep making like paladins during the whole Imperial Age, so that's not a problem. But if we are considering that on a 1v1, it becomes a problem, because your opponent barely has to hold you. If he just hold you back until he can use his better trash units, like an Imperial Age Vietnamese skirmisher, a winged Russar from the Lithuanians, or a winged Russar from the Poles, or even a regular civilization such as the Huns with basic Russars but extra upgrades on their skirmisher and halberdiers, the Frank is actually going to suffer, because without the gold, every other civilization can actually bash the Franks regarding their trash unit. Because of these weak trash units, Franks do suffer a lot, and they are doomed to having to deal with the opponents on the early stages of the game. And as I said, there were many changes in the game, many from the Cav archer civilizations got stronger. We got into the Cav archer meta at some point, and also not only that, but the Franks also lost quite some power because we also have many camel civs on the game these days. For example, the Gurjaras that can already start making camels during the feudal age. We also have, for example, the Saracens, and now their camels have extra HP. We have the Hindustanis with extra attack on their camels. So we do have many civilizations that are better than the Franks. Also, guys, to some extent, there are even some good replacements for the Frank. For example, the Wei, a civilization that will scale by gaining one villager per economical upgrade. In a regular game, the Wei can just replace their knight line for the Hague 1 cavalry, and honestly, you just have a civilization that has HP bonus on their knights, and they also gain villagers upon advancing. And if we are talking about the 1v1, this unit will have way better units. For example, the Xianbei Rider, a cheaper Cav archer option to play during the late stages of the game, then that scales and that has great synergy with the other things here. For example, the Russar. I think that lacking Russar is hurting the Franks big time here, and their paladins are limited by the gold. So other civilizations are actually taking the place from the Franks. Sometimes games are not going towards the Imperial Age on the competitive meta, and we're not seeing so many team games. We're mostly seeing a 1v1 tournaments. For that reason, Franks are becoming less and less popular, and since in the 1v1 they do not shine so much, they are getting limited to be played on team games. Still, on team games they are quite powerful. You can still play by messing up a lot of army, adding more and more knights during the game, and pressuring your opponent together with your ally that will usually be playing with ranged units. For example, in this game where you have the Frank being supported by the Mayan. What the Frank can really do here to shine is to just mass and mass and mass and mass more and more knights, and later add even more stables to keep massing knights and create that death ball here, since that the castle age with their knights, and later on the imperial age they will actually scale until paladin, where they are actually gonna have the extra HP. So this is basically the Franks, and these are basically the issues here from the French tech tree. Honestly, I don't know if the French do need a rework. The problem is that every time I see people trying to balance the Franks, they're just trying to boost somehow the throwing X-Men. They did got busted here. They do have now extra range, they do have extra HP. Better exit is also a great technology here, but guys, you are still with the same issue. You have a double gold composition, Paladin and throwing Axeman. Oh, once gold is over, what are you supposed to do? Try to play with like throwing Axeman as your backline unit? That's an option, but you are still gonna get outranged and outmaneuvered by any kind of Cavarcher civilization. So for this reason, I believe that the way to correct or to improve the Franks is to somehow improve one of their stats on their trash units. Honestly, since they are a cavalry civilization, why not give some extra bonus there for the later stages of the Imperial Age, so that the light cav can at least compete against Russars? That would actually be my suggestion here, if we could improve the Civ, but that's not what this video is about. We're making a civilization overview, so let's talk about other French strengths here other than the cavalry. Honestly, there's none. So basically this is probably going to be the shortest video, because all that I have to talk about is that the Franks should be playing like this. In the 1v1, I would say that you actually want to play with the knight, being oriented here to the knights. So my personal suggestion is that you actually invest into elite skirmishers as a support unit, or that you even boom a bit with Cavarchers during the castle age, but always go back and try to finish the game with a big strike using your knights. You also have a small discount on your castles that you can use if your opponent tries to counter you with the regular melee counters, such as the halberdier and the camel. You can of course add the throwing axeman, but that's honestly a very predictable game, and for this reason sometimes players will counter and even be prepared for the Franks transitions. With that said, it's still a pretty solid Civilization 14 games, and if you are playing Pocket in a map like Arabia, I would suggest that you keep using the Franks and you keep using their knights, because they are very special and they scale better than any other knight on the game. Alright guys, let's now talk about the Franks in 1v1 scenarios, what they can do, what they are good at, and how they can play, because, well, different from team games, you are not going to be able to play like full cavalry every time. Your opponent might do different things, and you might actually have to deal with like spearman and archer rushes since like minute 10. So how does a Frank actually performs, and what are the biggest strengths and of this civilization in the 1v1? Well, to start with, going for an early build that prioritizes going for early meal is pretty good. The Frank will benefit from fast gathering fort bushes, so this means that their early feudal age game, their late Dark Age and early Feudal Age game can be pretty good because of the access to the forage bushes. Their best opening here, honestly, is the Scout one. Why the Scout? Once reaching Feudal Age, the Franks will actually gain their extra 20% HP bonus, which means that their scouts are gonna have 54 HP. So in the 1v1, the Frank scout actually delivers more damage than an enemy one. You only need to upgrade double BDX because you already have a free horse collar. So that, combined with the scout rush, allows you to start spamming farms around your TC at a very good cost here. Basically, you are just going to have a very efficient farming because your farms are just not going to recede and you do not need to invest into the horse collar. So you get all the horse collar benefits without needing its investment, which means that you basically are saving 150 resources here. So basically, how do you want to play the Franks? Open scouts. Opening scouts is one of the most popular ways of playing the civilization. You are actually taking advantage from most of it, and as a support unit, my personal recommendation would be going for skirmishers if you notice that your opponent has started to make archers. On this game, for example, Andre just noticed that Lewis is transitioning from scouts to archers. He's playing against an Ethiopian, so it's expected that this guy will try to focus on archers, and in order to deal with this, he already transitions into the skirmisher. Skirmishers are created rated a bit faster than archers and are a great counter unit. So basically, when choosing to go for skirmishers, he's already nullifying the effect of the enemy archers here. And of course, then he just needs to keep harassing his enemy with constant ratings. Some walls, and then he's ready to go to the next age. Upon going towards the castle age, there are two choices that our Frank player can do. Will he play based more on their knights or more on counter units? So when you're playing against archer civs, it's very common that the Franks will either choose to go knight plus siege, and the siege will be necessary here to deal with an excessive amount of archers, or the Frank will actually choose to go for the counter unit, which are the elite skirmishers. So in this scenario, he's not going to play with his core strength. Of course, there are many other options. For example, playing crossbowmen, playing cav archers, but if you're trying to play against a specialized archer civilization such as the Shu, such as the Ethiopian, the Britons, trying to go for either cav archer or crossbowman will just put you in a mirror match against against a better civilization. For this reason, it's very common that the Frank player will often choose to go for the elite skirmisher line. As you can see in this game, Frank already added another archer range, and of course, if he wants to, he can even try to go for a massive amount of army and play both elite skirmishers and knights. This, in my opinion, is probably the best way for the Frank to play. On this game, his opponent is also making a few knights, so trying to play only skirmishers doesn't feel like it's going to work. He'll actually need at least a monastery in order to be able to convert those knights, but then adding multiple knights together with skirmishers actually provide enough power for him to at least survive these early patches here from the Ethiopian player. Going for skirmisher only might be bad because you might actually be stuck against crossbowmen plus mangonel army compositions. So going for both knights and elite skirmishers is also a very good option. As you can see in this case, the player is delaying his booming in order to be able to produce the two units, an archer counter and also some knights. One of the biggest challenges here for the Frank player is to deal with camels. So when having to deal with camels, I think my 2 cents here would be, first off, go for monks. Monks would be great to convert those guys, or use your massed ranged units from feudal and early castle age as a support unit. For example, right there, the enemy has camels, but they do not have bloodlines, so even a few skirmishers can actually deliver a significant amount of damage and get rid of the camels. Of course, if you're actually playing against some guy going for massive amount of camels, like a Berber or a Byzantine going like 3 stables, I don't think skirmishers is going to be a good idea on these scenarios. I would suggest you to either switch here to crossbowmen, add monks, or even start adding pikemen. Those are actually my 2 cents about the army compositions. Regarding the economy, Frank already have the Brevi Plow researched once they reach Castle Age, which means that their farms are also pretty good, so they can just keep harassing and spamming army. Right there, as you can see, the enemy is defending with massive amount of camels. He is Ethiopian, so those are not even one of the best camels of the game. It's not as powerful as the Hindustani, the Gurjara, or even the Saracen one, but even so, it's tricky to deal with these camels. And as I said, going for at least a few monks is the best thing you can do here to provide extra safety for your knights. Later, a player can actually decide to add some pikemen, but I would not suggest going for pikemen so early. Pikemen can be outmaneuvered and ignored on early castle age, so actually focus on the booming and keep your core units here, and only later switch to pikemen if that's what you want to do. Ethiopians trying to get a castle here on the hill. Frank actually goes for the fight with the aid of monks and a massive amount of knights. The Frank actually deals enough damage and keeps the hill. If you're playing with Franks, I think that one of the most must-thing here that you need to do is to keep the map control. This is very important, and I'm going to explain why. First off, the Franks, some of the Frank unit does not scale so well into the next stage, into the next age. They actually are very dependent on gold units, so they're very dependent to have gold to keep their cavalry line, and even switch to some support unit like hand cannoneer, throwing axeman. So for this reason, this civilization does demand a lot of gold. If you do lose the map control, your opponent might start getting like castles in strategical positions that will deny your access to gold. So what you want to do here as the Frank is to mass a good amount of army during the castle age so that you can keep the map control. One of the best tools for the Frank to keep the map control is using their cheaper castle bonus. Basically, the castles from the Franks does cost minus 15% and even 25% on both castle and imperial age. For this reason, it's cheaper for the Frank to make castles. So one of the biggest plays for the civilization is 1. Going heavy on the stone on the late castle age and start getting control of the map. So control strategical gold positions, control strategical hills, and of course make sure that you are controlling everywhere where you can get gold. I would give priority to getting both hills and neutral golds with your castle, because this would actually require your opponent to invest into siege just in order to try and reclaim back these positions. As you can see here, the Frank is on the top of this hill, making it very awkward to get pushed back by his enemy, and he is increasing his line of sight, knowing where are all the gold spots of the game and trying to get those. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that the Frank archer range does not scale so well during the Imperial Age. You are lacking both bracer and ring archer armor, which means that the only upgrade that you can actually do that will affect your ranged units is chemistry. For that reason, the skirmishers from the Franks are not much better than a regular castle age skirmisher. For this very reason, I would say that going or investing into the skirmisher line usually proves to be a mistake. I would say that if you are playing against a Frank and he's trying to go for skirmishers, you can just keep massing archers, or I have archers, and those units alone are going to be able to deal with the skirmishers. So for this reason, different from civilizations like Lithuanians, Georgians, Khmer, all those cavalry civs that actually scale pretty well in their skirmisher line and have like a great support unit, the Franks are actually very dependent to play their own cavalry and infantry, because these units are very bad. I would say that some civilization that has a similar stat from the Frank on that matter are the Romans, but the Romans actually have a very cheap Scorpion, which can actually overcome this weakness. And of course, their infantry is also something else. With that said, it's very common that when you are playing as the Franks, players will actually go for heavy cavalry counters, knowing how weak your ranged units are. For example, as you can see in this game, Andrew is playing here heavy into the cavalry, while his opponent is playing with both camel riders and halberdiers. So yes, two different paladin counters, also a few monks here. So this will be very often something that the Frank players will have to face, and there are at least 1 or 2 ways to deal with that. Let's talk about those ways. The first one, and honestly the most simple one, is just go for a massive amount of knights, keep always a few monks as a support units to both convert and keep healing your paladins. Use whatever arm you have left from Castle Age, for example a few skirmishers to keep supporting you on the fight, but just rely on having the map control. While having the map control, you are always going to be able to fight on good positions. For example, fighting from uphill to downhill, forcing your opponents to struggle against hills, and of course, whenever you feel like you might lose the fight because you do not have the hill and your opponent might have way too much reinforcements, just go back and forcing into bad spots, fighting under castles and under siege fire. This is probably the best way to play with the Frank civilization, and going like full paladin. As you can see, this is a full technology, a full quill here full of paladins and bomber cannons can actually work pretty well. I honestly would suggest adding at least a few support units like hand cannoneers, throwing axemen. It doesn't have to be a lot, just something like 15 units will actually do wonders for you, especially when you are playing against halberdiers. If you are playing against some massive counter that requires gold, And I would actually list here, for example, the Imperial Age camel from the Hindustanis, the Revi camel that many civilizations have access to. My personal recommendation is to mix into your paladins a few halberdiers. So the mix of paladins and halberdiers is pretty good when trying to deal with enemy camels. But if you are actually facing some weaker unit like the halberdiers, just keep investing here into your paladins and of course a few support units that also cost gold. For this strategy to work and for the Frank to keep pressuring and sustain this over time, it's mandatory that the Frank is controlling the goats from the map. So for this reason, the map control is the must here for the Frank player. Mass army during the castle age, force fights, and let your knights control the game, because in this way you are going to be able to eat all the extra golds, all the third golds, and even steal some of your opponent gold by having the map control. This situation can drag itself along the game, and of course, if your gold is over, this can actually be quite bad for you. So you actually want to finish off the game by snowballing fights with your paladin. Basically, in the 1v1, a paladin will win against the halberdier. The halberdier does need extra numbers in order to compensate for that. So one of the keys here for the Frank is to get like a big fight and just snowball that into the death of his opponent. Right there, the paladins just took a big fight against the halberdier. His opponent is trying to replace here the halberdier line with using multiple barracks, but the Frank player is already pushing and massing more paladins. You win a fight, you go back, heal, keep the process, and keep using your gold to harass your opponent. So yes, full paladin is one of the good approaches that you can use for the Franks. One of the things that I would not suggest is going for elite skirmishers as your support unit. Do this in the last scenario available. If you can, just try to prioritize going for both throwing axemen and also the hand cannoneer. And there we go, another big fight, and the Franks needs to snowball that. Not the best fight, right? But still works pretty well. And if the Frank is winning, he can just keep snowballing his advantage until he wins the game. And that's basically one of the ways to play the Frank. Alright guys, let's talk now about another scenario that can actually happen to the Frank player. You are actually facing a stronger or at least a powerful enough cavalry civ to put you at danger. For example, the Berbers. Due to their access to cheaper units such as camel and knights, fighting like all against these knights can actually prove to be very troublesome. On this game, you have MBL facing McLuffy that is pressuring MBL very harshly here using all his knights and siege. How do you deal with that as the Frank? Well, there's another weapon that is not so spoken about, but is truly powerful, which are the throwing axemen. So getting use of the cheaper castles from the Frank, a Frank player can actually choose to go for the throwing axemen line instead of playing with the knights. The throwing axemen are quite powerful because they are a ranged infantry. This means that they do deal melee damage. For example, they can actually harass runs even with a few units from the distance, while actually inflicting a lot of impact here. On this game, McLuffy tries to jump home all the army from MBL. He's just protecting himself using a mix of town centers, castles, and a massive amount of throwing axemen. Do not mistake in this unit, this is not a regular ranged unit, this is an infantry unit with range. For this reason, this unit can be quite powerful and especially good at defending siege pushes on the castle age, especially made from runs. So this unit basically trades cost effectively against most of the nemesis from the Frank. So anything that counters cavalry, camels, halberdiers, all of these units are actually going to struggle a lot trying to deal with the throwing axemen. Honestly, I think that the best counters to throwing axemen are actually ranged units or even hand cannoneer. But here comes the problem. The counters of the throwing axemen actually dies to the paladin. So basically playing both paladin and throwing axemen is one of the best ways to play the Frank civilization. But even the throwing axemen alone is such a unit. Different from regular infantry units, you can can keep using the kiting movements and read and running against your opponent. Different from regular infantry units, you are always going to have 100% of your army inflicting damage on your opponent. So if this was a fight against regular long swordsmen, I would say that despite their stats, the long swordsman would most likely die. But if you do have access to the throwing axeman, you are always going to have all these units dealing damage, which means that you can actually melt the enemy units. Having this concept of ranged infantry actually causes a big disturbance here on the balance of the game, because it's very tricky to understand how powerful they are. So getting the use of the combination of the cheaper castles and this unit, the Frank also has this option. So you don't necessarily need to play all in cavalry. I know that civilization can be very one-dimensional in most of the times, but there is still this option of playing massively with the throwing axeman, and honestly it's totally worth to use this unit. I would say that the throwing axemen have been buffed several times. You can either even upgrade their range here with the unique upgraded bearded axe by adding one extra range, and honestly this one extra range is quite okay. I would say that I would first focus on massing up my unit, and then you can upgrade both elite and bearded axe. Bearded axe here, elite on the other castle, and of course you should always prioritize upgrading their attack if possible, because that's the stat that you want to increase. And if you are not facing an archer civ like the Ethiopians or Britons, where paladins are probably the best choice, then the throwing axeman can actually shine, especially against infantry civilizations. I would say that the throwing axemen sometimes counter a whole civilization tech tree. For example, if you're playing Franks against the Goth, there's very few options that the Goth can actually use to go against your elite throwing axeman. You're basically countering his whole barracks and his weak stable options here by using this unit. I would say that the throwing axeman might actually underperform against Revi Cav Archer units, for example the Mangudai, the Revi Cav Archer, or even the Camel Archer, but still they can trade quite effectively. And if you do use all of your superior economy from the Franks that you have built previously, like in this scenario, together with this unit, you can actually make a case to play full throwing axeman. I would honestly suggest that you should actually mix in throwing axeman together with the paladins. If not, ranged units can actually use their extra mobility and extra range to punish. Despite being a ranged infantry, you only have a maximum of 6 range, and honestly that's not a lot. That's not a lot. If you compare, for example, with an Arbalest, it will actually have 8 range, so 2 more than you. And if you actually compare yourself to Revi Cav Archer units, they are usually going to have 7 range, which is 1 more than you. So they are actually going to start shooting faster, which will force them to keep constantly hitting your units. So if you do have the throwing axeman, it's not just keep trading forever. You actually need some force here to push your opponent. For example, massive amount of either bombard cannons or trebuchets. I would say that bombard cannons have a great synergy with the throwing axeman, so does they have the trebuchet. I would like the bombard cannons a bit more because they can actually go for and snipe the ranged units from the distance, but I also like the trebuchets better if the goal here is to push and kill buildings. So if your goal here is to kill buildings, go for the trebuchets. If your goal there is to actually snipe a few masses of ranged units, then go for the bombard cannons. And honestly, the fighting against throwing axemen is quite awkward. If those were champions, these Revi Camel Archers would just be constantly trying to fight against them. But since we're actually talking about elite throwing axemen, getting closer to this unit actually has a cost that these units will actually try to avoid. Trying to go on the melee mode against this unit is almost suicide. I would say that due to the fact that they can actually be massed, throwing axemen are always going to be a great option here. Such a powerful unit. And as you can see, the Frank can sometimes just fool their quill up here with throwing axemen and win the game. But honestly, that does not take away the fact that as the Frank you should 1. Dominate the castle age, dominate the map control, make sure that you use your cheaper castle to get access to the extra gold, because be either paladins or throwing axemen, you're heavily dependent on using gold units here as the Frank to push. You do not have a good options of trash units like Hussars, elite skirmishers, so you do need to try and finish off the game while the gold is still going on. So pressure your opponent, counter the golds, make sure you even steal some of his golds if possible, and keep harassing whatever your opponent is. Franks are honestly one of the most popular civilizations for the early stages, for the early elos of the game. If you are a lower elo player, honestly, Franks are quite simple to play because being unidimensional means that, or lacking the complexity of some other civilizations is not a bad thing. The units from the Frank are not so bad to maneuver. Knights and throwing axemen are just like, okay, patrol and choose where to fight, and you're probably going to get good fights anyway. So this can actually be a very noob-friendly civilization, in my opinion. Franks are being less popular in tournaments because there are many good options, but they're still a very powerful civ. And honestly, I think that people are just sleeping on how powerful some of the Frank units can be, especially the elite throwing axemen. 70 HP, 4 melee and 4 pierce armor, 12 attack, but that's 12 attack that are always going to land whenever you are at least 6 range from your opponent. So you have the stats of an infantry unit placed here on the stats of a ranged unit placed on an infantry unit, which is quite crazy here. So unless you're facing like elite janissary or something like that, just play with the paladins, just play with elite throwing axemen, and these can actually be a very powerful Frank game.